Hello, and welcome to Same Crime, Different Time. I'm Jennifer Chambers. You know that I'm passionate about uncovering the truth. Here, we're taking that passion to the dark heart of the Pacific Northwest. As a true crime and historical writer, I've spent years immersed in the chilling archives of this region. Each week, we'll explore cases, both ancient and modern, of murder, unexplained events, strange places, and those who have simply vanished. We'll dig into the research, connecting the dots between past and present, revealing the threads of mystery that weave through our incredible, yet often unsettling, landscape. Prepare to be captivated as we discover that while times may change, the darkest aspects of human nature remain hauntingly the same. On November 29th, 1988, Deborah Lee Atrops left her job in Sherwood, Oregon, and she headed for a hair appointment in nearby Tigard. Deborah was a young wife. She was an adoptive mother of an infant daughter, and she had plans, ordinary plans, and a life ahead of her. But she never made it home. By December 1st, her car with her body inside was discovered on a quiet, dead-end road in Beaverton, Oregon. She had been physically assaulted and was strangled to death. Her case went cold for decades. Friends and family and investigators struggled with these unanswered questions. Something was known. More than one person believed they knew who did this. But the evidence they found wasn't strong enough to convict or charge. Then, nearly 35 years later, there were advances in forensic science and renewed investigative focus. So a cold case team reopened the file. And in 2025, a Washington County jury finally delivered a verdict. This is the story of Deborah Atrops, a case that sat in silence for decades, and the long, hard road to justice. This is Same Crime, Different Time. I'm Jen Chambers. Let's begin. Part 1. Who was Deborah Atrops? Deborah Lee Atrops was 30 years old in late 1988. Her life had been marked by love and marked by work. She was a bookkeeper by profession, and recently had adopted an infant daughter with her estranged husband, Robert Elmer Atrops. They had married in 1987. But by June of 1988, their marriage had begun to unravel, and they were living apart. She was living in an apartment in Salem, Oregon, and he was living alone in their Sherwood home. Deborah's co-workers described her as dependable, hardworking, and devoted to her daughter. Friends recalled that in the weeks before her disappearance, Deborah spoke of both fear and hope. She was concerned for her safety, but she was committed to building a fresh life for herself and her child. Yet on Tuesday, November 29th, 1988, a routine evening would become a mystery that haunted Oregon for decades. Part 2. The Disappearance. On that Tuesday evening, Deborah left work in Sherwood at 5:15 p.m., and she drove to her hair appointment in Tigard. She arrived on time, and she left around 7. She was dressed in a blue coat, and she carried her personal items. She planned to pick up her infant daughter from her husband's home, which was a short drive away in Sherwood. Sherwood and Tigard and Beaverton are all kind of bedroom communities to Portland, so they're all very close together. You can hardly tell where one ends and one begins. So they're pretty close. But she never arrived in Sherwood to pick her up. According to Robert, her husband, he called friends and family and all around, and he also called 911 a short time later at about 9:30 p.m. to report her missing. But police later found no record that those calls were made from his home phone. Investigators began to suspect that his account wasn't true and did not match reality. Police issued a missing persons report on November 30th of that year, and Deborah's car was entered into law enforcement databases. It would take another 2 days before the authorities found her. Part 3. Discovery. On the morning of December 1st, 1988, Police in Beaverton responded to a report of suspicious abandoned vehicle on a dead-end road near Southwest Murray Road and Southwest Shoals Ferry Road. It was a 1988 black Honda Accord. The keys were in the ignition, the driver's window was down, and the car had no license plates. The car had actually been sitting there for at least a day unnoticed. It wasn't until patrol officers checked that they realized that the vehicle, which had been abandoned and was frosted up from the cold, was the one that belonged to Deborah. When investigators opened the trunk, they found her. Deborah was dead. Her body was covered in mud. Her life had been stolen far from her home. An autopsy later confirmed that she had been physically assaulted and strangled. At the time, police suspected foul play immediately, of course, and for decades they pursued that suspicion even when there wasn't enough evidence to bring any charges. Part 4. A cold case set in motion. For years, Deborah's case remained unsolved in the police department database. Investigators followed leads, but hit many dead ends. Without any conclusive physical evidence or reliable eyewitness accounts, the case grew cold. But fast forward to 2020, and something shifted. Washington County formed their own cold case unit. This was funded by a federal grant that was titled Prosecuting Cold Cases Using DNA. This unit, which was staffed with cold case detectives and forensic consultants and prosecutors, reopened Deborah's file alongside some others that had been there sitting for decades. Detective Kevin Winfield took the lead. He painstakingly reviewed all of the decades-old evidence, including the clothing that Deborah wore the night that she disappeared. So by submitting these items for modern forensic DNA analysis, they were able to test evidence with methods were unavailable and didn't even exist in 1988. It's just absolutely bananas how quickly that field of science has grown and how we couldn't imagine police work without it today. Excuse me, I yawned. And in March 2023, which was more than 35 years after the crime, a Washington County grand jury indicted Robert Elmer Atrops, who was then 68 and living in Newberg, Oregon, and they charged him with second-degree murder in Deborah's death. He was arrested without bail. Part 5, the trial. So this trial began in early 2025. This was more than 3 decades after the murder. Jury selection and witness preparation, of course, took time, but the heart of this case centered on that DNA evidence and how science had finally made that breakthrough. So prosecutors introduced the analysis, and they showed that skin cells that matched Robert Atrops' DNA was on her coat. This was, of course, tested many, many years later. And statistical patterns linked the mud on her car to the soil near his home, which is very interesting. The senior deputy district attorney, whose name was Allison Brown, told the jurors that the combined evidence together with timeline discrepancies, these forensic patterns, and then also the new DNA data pointed clearly toward Roberts' guilt. But defense attorneys challenged this. They argued that DNA evidence can be complicated, especially when testing decades-old samples. They questioned how and when this DNA might have been deposited, because they had been estranged, but they also had been married and spent time together, even if it was just dropping off their daughter back and forth. They also questioned whether it could prove contact at the moment of murder, or, like I said, simply handling it at some point earlier. Despite these debates about the science and the certainty of what the evidence actually pointed to, the jury deliberated for less than a day. In April 2025, they found Robert Atrops guilty of second-degree murder in Deborah's 1988 death. Part 6. victims, family, and impact. It's easy to lose sight of the person who was killed at the center of this case. Deborah Lee Atrops was a daughter, a co-worker. She was a mother. She was someone making plans and dreams and ordinary decisions. And then one night, her life was cut short in a way that reverberated through generations. And her daughter had to grow up without a mom. At Robert's sentencing hearing in July 2025, family members spoke, and they talked about what the conviction meant. What the idea of justice, even as delayed as it was, could still not bring back. Her daughter was now grown, and she shared what a lifetime without her mom looked like. Her mom missed all the birthdays and graduations and weddings and grandchildren and all of the milestones that Deborah never got to see. And yet, for those closest to her, finally seeing jurors say her name and hear her story and render this verdict was a form of acknowledgement, too, that her disappearance wasn't forgotten and her life mattered. This case also highlights how cold case units and modern DNA analysis can give families a chance at justice long after these investigations have stalled out. Part 7. The death of Deborah Atrops was not an isolated tragedy. It was the beginning of her story that spanned many, many years for she and her whole family. A story of grief and questioning and hope, and ultimately accountability. Her family looked for answers for all of those years. Cold cases remind us that time doesn't erase the trauma, it only deepens the need for truth. And it shows us the power of persistence in re-examining this old evidence with new tools. Even when delayed, justice matters. It seemed that the evidence was pretty compelling if they only deliberated for less than a day. It's easy to, because I'm looking back at these cases through different documentation and newspaper articles and things like that. So it will be interesting to see exactly what kind of evidence was presented and how. That's when you'd like to be a fly on the wall for those kinds of discussions, because it does seem like it was pretty cut and dried. I appreciate knowing the end of the story, and I know that when we have endings to these cold cases, it means so much to the families. I like presenting some mystery sometimes, but it's also really nice when we have an answer. And how tragic. If you have any historical leads on cases that you'd like me to cover, or cases or leads you think that deserve a fresh look, email me at scdtpod@gmail.com. scdtpod@gmail.com. I'm Jen Chambers, and this is Same Crime, Different Time. Thanks for being with me today to explore the solved cold case of Deborah Atrops. Stay curious and stay compassionate, and remember the faces and the names behind the headlines. I'll see you next week.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Thanks for listening today. Please review and rate wherever you listen to podcasts. That really helps out the show. And please leave us a voicemail at the Spotify link. Also, you can always feel free to send us an email at scdtmail@gmail.com or www.jennifer-chambers.com.